He holds a bachelor's degree in history from Harvard and a master's and PhD from Columbia. He's the author of 9 books, 2 of which are New York Times bestsellers, including most recently his book Meltdown, which I'm sure many of you have read. His books have been translated into 12 languages. He won the $50,000 First Prize Templeton Enterprise Award in 2006 for his book The Church and the Market. He has appeared on just about every major cable news network and has been a guest on hundreds of radio programs to discuss and defend his views. His writing has been described by the Journal of American Studies as making complex philosophical and theological concepts approachable. And I have to agree with that assessment. Tom Woods has the gift of being able to write and lecture with authenticity, honesty, and intelligence. His work speaks to us on every intellectual level without ever talking down to anybody. Without Tom Woods' work, there would be far fewer candidates like me inspired to run. So I appreciate what he's done. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage one of the Liberty Movement's most entertaining and influential minds, author and historian Tom Woods.
Thank you. That's just wonderful. Thank you, Valerie. That was a very kind introduction. I appreciate that. On the one hand, I'm thrilled that suddenly the Federal Reserve System is like a topic you can talk about now in public, right? People talk about it, and it's sort of taken for granted that, yeah, you know, some people are against the Federal Reserve, and this has become part of the landscape. I mean, none of us could have predicted this. Well, now another thing is becoming slowly but surely part of the landscape that never in a million years would I have guessed would happen. And that's the idea of state nullification of unconstitutional federal law. Now, I am shocked that this thing is taking off. I'll define it in a minute, but I've been writing and speaking about this for years. No one listens, right? You know, it just goes on and on, and, you know, just speak and write, and nothing happens. And then all of a sudden, bang, it just starts happening. I mean, we've got all sorts of things going on around the country I'm going to talk about tonight that, as I say, it just shocks me. Now, what is this idea? Well, it was given its classic formulation by Thomas Jefferson, which I never cease to remind people of. Every time they want to say, well, that sounds like a crankish idea. Well, if you'd like to be a crank with Thomas Jefferson, rather than be a mainstream guy, you know, with Keith Olbermann, I think, you know, the odds are pretty good with it, you know. But Jefferson's view was, and it's really common sense, which almost all the stuff we talk about, foreign policy, the economy, the Fed, it's really just common sense. What he's saying is, let's take the hypothetical situation that the federal government has passed an unconstitutional law. I mean, let's try to imagine this. What recourse do we have? I mean, we could vote the guys out. How's that one working? Has that strategy been working? How's that been going? Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't do it. We should try. I mean, sure, why not? Try everything. But I mean, you know, elections don't always yield you, you know, like the best people. It just seems to be. So what other things could we try? We could all sign a petition to the government. Hey, please stop oppressing us. Yeah, we could do that. But Jefferson was unimpressed by these alternatives. Jefferson said, well, let's see. If a law is unconstitutional, then it's no law at all. So therefore, we shouldn't enforce it. See? What in the world is controversial about that? I mean, this is the type of environment we're in right now where that would be controversial is what's strange, not the idea of nullification itself. And Jefferson's argument was that the states, after all, created the federal government. Okay, the states came first, then you had the federal government. It's like the bride and groom come first, then you have the marriage. You don't have the marriage, and then the marriage creates the bride and groom. But that's what the alternative view is, that the federal government created the states. No, it didn't. The states created the federal government, and they gave it the powers that it has. And so Frankenstein's monster does not have more power than Frankenstein. He is the creature. Frankenstein, the scientist, is the creator. The states are the creators of the federal government. So they ought to have a little say on, what powers they granted to the federal government. And Jefferson's concern was, if we say that the federal government has a monopoly on interpreting the Constitution, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, this is not brain surgery. If they have a monopoly on interpreting the Constitution, they're going to interpret it in their own favor. Surprise, big surprise. And then we all scratch our heads. Gee, why has the government gotten completely out of control? I just don't understand it. So this is what Jefferson warned us about, and he equipped us with the idea of nullification. In 1798, we got the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of that year that made clear that the states retained this power to judge for themselves of the constitutionality of federal laws and to reserve the right to refuse to enforce them if they went beyond the federal government's delegated powers. Now, these documents from 1798 in the 20th century were hardly referred to at all. I mean, in 1998, when we had the 200th anniversary, I don't recall Bill Clinton having a big celebration. It's the 200th anniversary of the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. You could hear crickets, right? There was no response at all. But yet, one thing I'll say, well, I can say a lot of things about Campaign for Liberty, but the relevant one right now is that Campaign for Liberty's pocket constitution is the only pocket constitution I've ever seen that also contains the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 1798. So that we are to understand this Constitution in light of that. Now, where did this come from? I mean, was this just, was Jefferson drunk one day and he said, hey, I got a great one for you. We'll just nullify all the laws. No, it turns out that these ideas go back years. Jefferson didn't just make this up out of nowhere. If you look at the convention, the Virginia Ratifying Convention, in which Virginia decided whether or not it wanted to ratify the Constitution, if you look at that event, you see that the Federalists, the ones who support the Constitution, are responding to their anti-Federalist critics by assuring them the federal government will have only those powers that are expressly delegated. They use the word expressly, by the way. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about the general welfare clause or anything like that. The federal government has only the powers expressly delegated to it. And the five-man committee, whose job it was to draft the instrument of ratification for Virginia, included George Nicholas, who became the Attorney General for Kentucky, Edmund Randolph, who became later U.S. Attorney General and was Governor of Virginia, and they, great supporters of the Constitution, they said Virginia will be exonerated from it if the federal government should go beyond its powers. So already in 1790, Alexander Hamilton is already up to his tricks. And Patrick Henry in Virginia saying, whoa, 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 wait a minute, this is unconstitutional. And we were assured when we ratified this document that we would be exonerated if this government should exceed its powers. And so Patrick Henry used the language of these assurances from the ratifying convention, drafted a resolution, and got it through the legislature of Virginia. As the 1790s moved on, Thomas Jefferson's friend John Taylor of Caroline wrote a series of pamphlets and letters and pieces in which he argued that the state governments ought to watch carefully for unconstitutional federal legislation. So by the time Jefferson writes the Kentucky Resolution of 1798, this is sort of old hat, like everybody sort of knows this, that of course the states aren't required to just sit back and be lectured to by a government they themselves created. They have to have a say. If you enter into a contract with somebody, you would never, ever would you say that the other party in the contract can exclusively interpret what it means. You'll let the other person interpret what it means. I mean, could you imagine somebody signing, like in my case, like a publishing contract, but I say that only the publisher gets to really interpret what the contract means. So the contract says we'll pay you X dollars, but then maybe they'll interpret it to mean we'll pay you X dollars in the year 3000 or something. So obviously if only one party to a contract gets to interpret it, it's going to interpret it in its own favor. So this is what Jefferson is telling us about.